For over 5,000 years, the Sumerians have long held the prestigious title of Earth's first civilization. They are credited with inventing writing, constructing towering ziggurats, and developing sophisticated mathematics that continues to underpin our world today. However, when scientists finally analyzed ancient Sumerian DNA in 2023, they uncovered something truly profound, a discovery that fundamentally overturns long-held assumptions about human migration and the very origins of civilization itself. The genetic markers found in Sumerian remains bore no resemblance to modern Middle Eastern populations. They didn't match Europeans. They didn't even align with populations from neighboring regions that were supposedly their direct descendants. The Sumerians, it appears, emerged from seemingly nowhere and then vanished equally mysteriously. This unprecedented discovery has ignited a fierce scientific debate. So, where did the Sumerians truly come from? If you're fascinated by ancient mysteries, be sure to hit subscribe. The story begins in southern Mesopotamia around 4,500 BCE. One moment, the archaeological record shows simple farming villages. The next, you have sprawling, sophisticated city-states, complete with complex irrigation systems, monumental architecture, and the world's very first written language. The Sumerians seemingly materialized onto the historical stage, fully formed and remarkably advanced. Their cities bore names that still resonate through the corridors of history: Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Lagash, Nippur. Each was an independent city-state, ruled by a powerful priest-king who asserted divine authority. Uruk alone boasted a population of over 50,000 people by 2900 BCE, making it the undisputed largest city in the ancient world at that time. The Sumerians established the first schools, known as edubas, where scribes meticulously learned cuneiform. They authored the first legal codes, founded the first libraries, and even compiled the first pharmacopoeias detailing medical treatments and remedies. They ingeniously divided the day into 24 hours, the hour into 60 minutes, and the circle into 360 degrees. Every time you check the time or measure an angle, you are, in essence, utilizing Sumerian mathematics. But here's what made them genuinely unique. While other ancient cultures often left behind myths about their origins, the Sumerians themselves left meticulous records that boldly asserted an origin from a distant land. Their own texts describe a homeland called Dilmun. Some tablets explicitly mention coming from across the sea, while others refer to descending from the mountains. For decades, scholars largely relegated these narratives to the realm of myth. Yet, the compelling DNA evidence now suggests the Sumerians might have been articulating a profound truth about their identity as true outsiders. The perplexing twist is that the Sumerians themselves mysteriously faded from the historical record around 2000 BCE. They were successively overrun by the Akkadians, then the Babylonians, and their distinct language slowly faded into oblivion. The people who lived in Mesopotamia after them spoke Semitic languages and practiced different cultural traditions. It was as if the Sumerians had been completely replaced, leaving no trace. For years, scientists operated under the long-standing assumption that later Mesopotamian populations were merely descendants of the Sumerians who had undergone cultural assimilation. After all, conquered people often adopt their conqueror's language and customs, while nonetheless preserving their genetic continuity. This pattern was observed, for instance, with the Romans and the various peoples they conquered across Europe. But when researchers finally extracted and sequenced DNA from Sumerian remains, that foundational assumption dramatically unraveled. The breakthrough came from a joint research project between the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology and the University of Baghdad. For years, extracting ancient DNA from Mesopotamian sites had been considered virtually impossible. The extreme heat of the region accelerates DNA degradation, and most skeletal remains from the area were either too contaminated or too degraded to yield viable genetic material. The team strategically shifted their focus to specific burial sites within the ancient city of Ur, where some remains had been preserved in hermetically sealed tombs, which had shielded the delicate genetic material from the harsh elements. Using advanced extraction techniques developed for Neanderthal DNA research, they successfully sequenced partial genomes from a dozen individuals, dated between 2600 and 2400 BCE. What they found sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The Sumerian genetic profile revealed an astonishingly unique combination of genetic markers, entirely absent from any known modern population group. They possess distinct haplogroups that are exceedingly rare today. But even more surprising was what they conspicuously lacked. They lacked genetic markers prevalent in modern Middle Eastern populations, including Arabs, Persians, and modern Iraqis. The lead researcher, Dr. Elena Vasquez, described it as unearthing a genetic ghost, a population that left a clear signature in the ancient world, but seemingly dissolved into thin air. The initial hypothesis was that the Sumerians must have been entirely annihilated or forcibly displaced. Yet, how does a population numbering in the hundreds of thousands simply disappear without leaving any descendants? The research team meticulously tested remains from Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian sites. The results revealed an undeniable genetic discontinuity. This was a clear-cut population replacement event. To understand where the Sumerians may have originated, the team compared their genetic markers to ancient DNA samples from across the vast expanse of Eurasia. They tested for matches with ancient Anatolian, Caucasian, Iranian Plateau, and Central Asian populations. The closest matches came from an intriguing and somewhat unexpected direction. The Sumerian genetic profile showed intriguing partial similarities to ancient populations from the Zagros Mountains in western Iran, and even more intriguingly, to much older genetic signatures from the Caucasus region and even parts of Central Asia. But here's where the narrative becomes intricate. These similarities were not robust enough to definitively pinpoint Sumerian origins within a single, discrete region. It was more like the Sumerians represented a composite genetic mixture that had coalesced elsewhere before they arrived in Mesopotamia. Some genetic markers suggested East Asian ancestry, others indicated a West Asian heritage, and still others bore signatures more commonly associated with ancient populations from the Eurasian steppes. The Sumerians appeared to be a fascinating hybrid population, forged through intermixing in a prior, distinct location before their eventual migration to southern Mesopotamia. This genetic evidence suddenly lent startling new credibility to their own ancient origin narratives. They truly may have originated from a distant land. They indeed could have been outsiders, carrying with them a highly advanced culture, who then brought it to the region. The conventional historical narrative has long depicted the Sumerians either as indigenous to Mesopotamia or as migrants from immediately adjacent regions. Most textbooks describe them as developing from the local Ubaid culture, a pre-Sumerian farming culture within the same geographical area. The DNA evidence, however, compels us to critically reevaluate, if not entirely abandon, that long-accepted narrative. If the Sumerians were genetic outsiders, then they must have migrated from somewhere. But from where and when? One prominent emerging theory suggests the Sumerians were part of a more extensive migration wave from the Caucasus region that occurred around 5000 to 4000 BCE. During this tumultuous period, compelling archaeological evidence points to widespread population movements across the Near East. Climate change was making some regions increasingly inhospitable, simultaneously opening up new and fertile agricultural opportunities in river valleys like the Tigris and Euphrates. The genetic data shows that the Sumerians had ancestral components bearing resemblance to ancient Caucasian populations, but they also possessed genetic markers suggesting admixture with populations originating further east, possibly from the Iranian Plateau or Central Asia. This intriguing mosaic of genetic clues gives rise to a truly fascinating possibility. What if the Sumerians weren't a single ethnic group, but rather a confederation or amalgamation of distinct peoples from different regions, who came together and developed their distinctive culture either before or during their migration to Mesopotamia. This would elegantly explain why their genetic profile is so remarkably anomalous. They would have been a comparatively small, yet genetically diverse population that maintained a striking degree of genetic isolation once they settled in Sumer, preferentially intermarrying within their own established communities rather than mixing extensively with surrounding indigenous populations. Notably, the archaeological record lends substantial weight to this hypothesis. Sumerian cities show evidence of pronounced social stratification, featuring a distinct ruling class that demonstrably maintains separation from the common laborers. Sumerian texts themselves describe strict social hierarchies and endogamous marriage rules. But if there was a Sumerian ruling class that maintained such genetic separation, what became of them when the Akkadians conquered Sumer around 2334 BCE? Historical records from that period describe Akkadian rule, but make no mention of mass killings or expulsions of Sumerian populations. The Akkadian king Sargon actually purported to honor Sumerian gods and traditions. Most historians, therefore, assume the Sumerians simply continued to inhabit their cities, albeit under new governance. The genetic evidence, however, presents a starkly different picture. By 2000 BCE, the Sumerian genetic signature had, to a significant extent, vanished from Mesopotamia. This profound disappearance implies one of three scenarios: a mass exodus, a selective population replacement, or perhaps extensive intermarriage that so thoroughly diluted the distinctive Sumerian genetic markers that they became unrecognizable. Some researchers are now investigating a more controversial yet compelling possibility. What if significant numbers of Sumerians migrated out of Mesopotamia during or after the Akkadian conquest? What if their descendants survived somewhere else entirely? If the Sumerians left Mesopotamia, where did they go? This tantalizing question has catalyzed the emergence of a burgeoning field within genetic archaeology, focused specifically on finding potential descendant populations. The research has already led to some truly astonishing discoveries. In 2024, a team from Seoul National University published findings showing that specific, isolated populations nestled within the Caucasus Mountains exhibited genetic markers strikingly similar to those of the ancient Sumerians. Specifically, they found notable matches within small, genetically isolated communities in Dagestan and parts of Georgia that have maintained remarkable genetic isolation for millennia. These populations were entirely unaware of any ancestral connection to ancient Sumerians. They possess their own distinct linguistic and cultural traditions. Yet the genetic signatures were undeniably there, suggesting that some Sumerian lineages might have endured by effectively returning to the ancestral regions from which they originally hailed. Further amplifying the intrigue was a study from Kyoto University that found the presence of potential Sumerian genetic markers within specific Central Asian populations, particularly in secluded mountain communities in Tajikistan and eastern Iran. These matches were admittedly less pronounced than the Caucasus findings, but they suggested that the Sumerian genetic legacy could have dispersed across a far more expansive geographical area than previously thought. The most contentious claim came from a research team in China, positing the discovery of Sumerian-like genetic signatures in ancient remains from the Tarim Basin, a region in western China renowned for its enigmatic Bronze Age mummies. Could there be a connection to the Sumerians? The evidence remains hotly debated. The genetic similarities are partial and could plausibly be attributed to both groups sharing more ancient common ancestors, rather than indicating direct Sumerian migration to Central Asia. Nonetheless, it has undeniably opened a Pandora's box of new questions regarding Bronze Age population movements across Eurasia. What is increasingly evident is that the Sumerian genetic story is considerably more intricate than a straightforward narrative of emergence and disappearance. Their genes did not simply vanish without a trace. Instead, they dispersed and diluted over the millennia, gradually absorbed into the genetic fabric of other populations. Think of it like dropping a cup of colored water into a swimming pool. The Sumerian genetic signature could still persist within modern populations, albeit in a form too diluted for easy detection. As genetic testing becomes progressively more sophisticated, and as our databases of ancient DNA expand, the Sumerian DNA discovery is compelling a fundamental rethinking of the very mechanisms by which civilizations emerge and how human populations migrate across landscapes over time. For decades, archaeologists have grappled with two primary models. The Sumerian case offers a remarkably compelling endorsement of the migration model in a dramatic way. A distinct external population, characterized by unique genetics and an advanced culture, arrived in Mesopotamia and subsequently established the first cities. This raises challenging questions about other ancient civilizations. Did the ancient Egyptians have a similar genetic discontinuity with their preceding populations? What about the Indus Valley Civilization or the early Chinese dynasties? One of the most powerful pieces of corroborating evidence for Sumerian outsider status stems from the realm of linguistics. The Sumerian language has no discernible linguistic relatives. It's what linguists call a true language isolate. But here's an even more intriguing detail. While the Sumerian language itself is isolated, analysis of Sumerian vocabulary shows unequivocal evidence of extensive lexical borrowing from other languages, most notably from Semitic languages. The Sumerian DNA results have opened up far more questions than they have definitively answered. But such is the inherent nature of robust scientific inquiry. Each groundbreaking discovery invariably uncovers new mysteries. What we can now state with certainty is that the Sumerians were genetic outsiders who journeyed to Mesopotamia, bringing with them a distinctive cultural package, and subsequently established the world's inaugural urban civilization. One undeniable truth that DNA evidence unequivocally clarifies is that the Sumerians, in their own ancient texts, were indeed speaking a profound truth. They were outsiders. They did come from somewhere else. And they really were something unique in human history. A population that appeared, profoundly changed the world, and then vanished, leaving behind mysteries written in both clay tablets and genetic code. Subscribe to stay updated on new discoveries in ancient DNA research and archaeology. Next week, I'm covering new findings about Neanderthal DNA in modern populations that are rewriting human evolution. The video is linked on screen right now.